So, Enter the Gungeon 2 was recently announced, and I am very excited. Even if slightly concerned about the switch from 2D to 3D, as a hardcore fan of the original who's been playing the game since its release, and someone who loves talking about game design, I wanted to share the 10 things that I hope will be incorporated in Enter the Gungeon 2 in no particular order. At number 1, well, this might sound obvious, but I really do hope they keep the important aspects that made the first game so great and unique. I've been seeing more and more sequels, honestly not understanding what made their first game so special. In the case of Enter the Gungeon, there are 3 important elements to me that define the franchise. The attention to details in items, enemies, and guns to the point where most guns will have their own sprites, animations, and even sound and visual effects. The overall vibe and goofiness, including the endless amount of puns and references, and last but not least, the crazy amount of content, combined with the high difficulty allowing players to spend hours and hours discovering more and more enemies, floors, bosses, and secrets, keeping engagement high for much longer than most other action roguelikes. These 3 points to me are what makes the first game so memorable. Considering that the game will now be moving to 3D, implementing all of these will be much more work, as creating unique sprites and animations, for example, is much less demanding in a 2D environment. While still slightly worried that this change of dimensions will reduce the amount of content, I do have hope that Dodge Roll will still deliver a well-constructed, large, fun sequel. Scripted synergies, where having specific combinations of items or weapons will upgrade or evolve said items, are super fun, and I very much expect them to be kept in the sequel. But having more homemade synergies would in my eyes really help elevate the roguelike elements. Having any amulets while having a way to trigger blanks repeatedly, having the portable table with a bunch of table techs, these are the kind of synergies that really spice up certain runs, and differently than a lot of other popular action roguelikes, I'd say Enter the Gungeon doesn't allow players to create these kinds of self-made synergies often, which I think is a shame. So I really hope they'll be more prominent in this sequel. Next up, I really hope they make each character feel more unique from one another. Currently, whenever I pick a character, past the first floor, they all pretty much feel the same. No matter which one I start with, if I find a couple of guns and items, no matter who I picked, I'll probably end up playing the exact same. Except for this guy, but he doesn't count. I'm not saying I'd want every character to have completely different playstyles, but taking a bit of inspiration from Isaac's amazing character design, I think could be really fun. What if a character started with the equivalent of like the Helix bullet upgrade, duplicating bullets but screwing with the accuracy? I think having at least a few characters that would actively change the run depending on the guns or items collected would be cool. Kind of like the gunslinger without the whole, being absurdly overpowered. At number 4, this goes without saying, but I really hope they keep the meta progression focused on unlocks and not power. In this day and age, most games of this genre tend to have meta progression that makes the player stronger and stronger every new run. And while I do think this approach is great for most games, making them much more accessible overall, in the case of Enter the Gungeon, I think its difficulty and focus on skill is part of its identity. Being able to beat the game on a fresh file just because of the player's skill and experience is not something we see often anymore. But I really hope they keep this approach for the sequel, even if it's less common of a design choice in 2025. That being said, while I do want the sequel to still have a heavy focus on skill, I do think they could adjust a specific high skill aspect, that being the no-hit boss reward. If you beat a boss without taking damage, the player is rewarded with a full heart container. Considering that health is very impactful in this game, this reward is in my opinion a bit too good, giving a huge upside for experienced players. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to still keep a reward for playing well, without necessarily making it so impactful. Revita used to have the same reward mechanic, but upon realizing how impactful having that extra health was versus not, they decided to instead make the no-hit reward give the player more reward choices to choose from instead. Something I think could work well in Gungeon. Instead of an additional heart container, giving the player a choice of 2 to 3 options instead of 1, I think would be more fun and balanced. There are elements of the first game I was not a huge fan of, and the secret walls are definitely one of them. Each floor has one secret wall, and if it's not in one of the obvious spots, you might be spending an unreasonable amount of time randomly shooting walls around the entire floor just looking for that crack. Finding a secret room is always enjoyable in roguelikes, but you shouldn't be wasting the player's time. So for this sequel, I hope either secret walls can initially be spotted with a minor visual indicator, like many other games, or that there is an actual logical location for the secret room on each floor players can try to figure out, depending on the layout, similar to the Binding of Isaac. Back when Enter the Gungeon came out, having single-player games with multiplayer aspects linked to them was not really a thing. But today, a lot of popular single-player roguelikes tend to have ways for players to connect with the community. While I myself don't tend to play these, I think having dailies or even weeklies could be a nice way for the community to compete with each other while still being a solo-focused game. Adding specific seeded runs players can compete in, even maybe with unique modifiers or challenges to them, is a fun and easy way to keep the game relevant, and something I could easily see this sequel having. And speaking of challenges, I'd love to see the sequel have more game modes or challenge runs. With how massive the first game is, there are so many unique challenge runs I thought of trying through mods, such as a table tech run only, bullet upgrades only, Casey only. These kinds of challenges are, in my opinion, really fun. Games with large amount of content can have the privilege of having these challenge runs, such as Isaac, Monster Train, but assuming that the 3D aspect doesn't reduce the amount of content drastically, hopefully, then I feel like Gungeon could be a nice contender for challenge runs. Kind of like the challenge mode that is currently in the first game, but with more additions and a lot more modes to choose from. Another thing is, please, no voice acting. As someone who actively works in that industry, I love voice acting, but there is a time and place for them. And after the success of the amazing Hades, I feel as if I've been seeing more and more indie games implementing voice acting, even if they don't necessarily fit very well, in my opinion.
The Inferno sings.
I personally cannot imagine Enter the Gungeon with them, and really don't think it would be appropriate with the overall tone and vibe of the game. Yes, I know there's Aghanim in the RNG department, but his voice was comedically mediocre, which I think was intentional and ends up working out, but just because he has that one voice and no other. And last, but certainly not least, I hope they improve on the music. Now, I'm not saying I dislike the actual composition of the original soundtrack. I very much enjoy the tracks individually, but did you know that the first boss music is the same as the second, third, even the last and the true ending boss? For a game with so much content, I'm honestly surprised to see how small the music variation is. Not to mention that, in my opinion, it's also a bit hard to differentiate each floor musically. So I do hope they add more music to at least the more important bosses, and maybe add a bit more variations between floors without necessarily changing the vibe of the music, because I really do like the actual composition. So there you go. Once again, these are just my opinions, thoughts of mine. I don't expect all or even most of these to be implemented, and whatever they decide to do with this sequel, I'm sure I'll enjoy it, or at least hope so. Feel free to share your thoughts on what you'd like to see added in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.